Hello, friends. Good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, depending on where in the world you live right now. So today we're looking at two blocking issues, and then the rest is just backlog. So first one, yeah, scroll all the way to the bottom. There was basically we reviewed this the first time. Is it actually the one we? Yeah, scroll further up, I guess. There's more commenting. Oh, sorry, that's the other one. Yeah, sorry. Look at the second one. So yeah, all the way to the bottom. Yeah, that's one I thought. So basically, this one we approved it. To scroll up further. So we basically have two. Basically, we said we wanted to have two different properties, and there was lots of discussion. And in the meeting, we said it would be nice if they would be the same. And then there was some concerns that this couldn't be made the same. And then after further discussion, they realized that actually they can be the same. And now they're basically asking to change it to basically be what we already wanted to have in the first place. So I think that looks fine, unless somebody else has any memories of why we thought the other one was better or has any concerns. I would just
I mean, the other one was better because it offers more control, but we actually implemented it and we weren't happy with the complexity and performance implications of it. So we're going back to this more simple API.
Awesome.
So how many other HTTP message handlers exist?
There's one for Blazor, which
there's one
we
for
don't,
iOS
we
as
don't
well,
have this config for, so but
Okay.
it's just these two.
Because my question was going to be if we're adding the same property with the same signature and the same semantics on everything, can we move it down?
No, this has to exist on the handler.
No, I meant by down, I think you meant HTTP message handler rather than the derived type.
Yeah, or HTTP client handler, or...
Oh, I see. Well, the HTTP message handler is actually an open API, so anyone can implement it. It wouldn't make sense to have this API there because then third-party implementations would just have something that does nothing.
I see. Well, then, yeah, the only question is at some point, like, let's say we add 3 or 4 more properties that end up being in the same bucket. Would we ever find ourselves in a world where somebody wants to do this generically? Or, I mean, if we ever do this, then we could potentially still extract it as an interface if we really wanted to. But
yeah, we kind of already have that situation today. There's not a good story for it, and the problem exists for several other properties as well. I think we need to think about it in a broader sense.
I think that was part of the reason why we said maybe we should have a property bag with extension methods, right? But I guess that's the same as pushing it down, right? It might not work, right? So,
well, the property bag is kind of intended for per request options, and this is more of a connection pool global option.
Yeah. No,
so
it also has
I
the
think
same
this is appropriate.
Yeah.
We could probably make some sort of more generic handler that forwarded to these, depending on what you wanted somehow. But yeah, this is fine for now.
So, like, help me understand in general, like, how does this work? People basically construct them themselves, right?
Yeah, so people construct one of these handlers and pass it into HTTP client.
And the only...
Oh, never mind.
No, I was just opening my mouth to say something, but there was a delay. My brain wasn't that fast. So I think my question was like, so let's say I write an ASP.NET web app, right? So like at some point I construct my HTTP client because I configure the base URL and stuff like that, right? Then, so presumably the Windows HTTP handler only makes sense when I'm on Windows, right?
Correct.
So is the expectation that people write basically light up code that says if Windows do a new Win HTTP handler, if some other condition use the other one, or are we?
So Socket's HTTP handler is the recommended implementation. Win HTTP handler exists basically just as a fallback. If someone wants some behavior that is specific to Win HTTP, or if for some reason we have a broken implementation in Socket's HTTP, that's kind of the option for them. But it's really more of an opt-in choice. Most people would not be using Win HTTP handler.
I see.
I don't remember if we painted that one with the minimum OS attribute emo.
I don't either. Like, does it actually blow up? Corey, when you extend this on Linux? I suppose it does, right?
I would hope so.
Yeah, let me actually take a note on that one, because that one we should definitely make sure we.
Yeah, not related to the
get
issue
on.
at hand, but since we were also talking about minimum OS attributes this week.
This one does exist as a NuGet package. It's not built in. Maybe that's why it wasn't included there.
Yeah, that's probably true, because I probably only scan what's actually shipping in the box. But yeah, that we should. No, actually, I was scanning everything that was built in the runtime repo, so that should have caught it. No, sorry, that's not what I'm doing. What I'm doing is I'm restoring a self-contained app targeting Net5 with a reference to the Windows Compat pack. And so this will generally catch most of our autoband NuGet packages, but clearly not all of them. So that's probably why.
Yep.
So in fact, yeah, I should probably rerun this thing and make sure that I have all packages from .NET runtime referenced.
Fun times. Yeah, if this is just another in a set of complexity that maybe should have been at a lower level, and we think that this is right, / we think that there are other handlers that people will interact with that this setting doesn't make sense for, then sure. But seeing repeated things here makes it really look a lot like it wants to move to the base type, or somewhere in the base hierarchy, and then optionally be virtual or just a setting that they could ignore, because nothing says that iOS has to respect it.
I mean, one thing we could do is, it doesn't have to be an interface. We could also say, if there is commonality between the handlers, and we can actually wait until we actually see them. We should just be mindful when we add properties that we align them, that we introduce a base type later, right? Like introducing a base type after the fact is not a breaking change. We have done this many times. So if there is commonality that we want to extract to something that sits between WinHTTP and sockets and the message handler, we can actually do that. Mm-hmm. So the only problem is they have to be literally the same signature, right? Like if they are disjoined, then this trick won't work very well.
Yeah, it's dubious if that would be helpful here. I mean, really, these properties are intended to be like, this is a setting for this specific implementation. The fact that both of them support this setting, it doesn't mean it's intended to be used in a generic fashion.
Fair enough.
Okay.
To me, it's more like, if you have a base type, you kind of like also avoid the fact that, we slightly spelled it differently, right? It's just these, mild annoyances when people didn't actually think of, this feature already exists elsewhere kind of thing, right? It's kind of like predicated on us just manually, carefully aligning them, right?
Yeah, and sometimes
point in time we would have approved a different thing before, right? I mean,
sometimes you have to
thought
spell
about
it,
but
though.
Yeah.
Because like with WinHTTP handler, we're basically, we have our hands tied with what WinHTTP supports. So if we implement something differently in sockets, then it may not make sense to have the same API.
Works for me.
All right. Are you slapping the attributes on, Emo, or should I?
Yeah, I'm just typing notes right now. We discussed pushing it down, but decided against it because people are not likely to code against the properties in a generic fashion. And that's ironically the general theme that I see across the BCL, right? Every time we have like some sort of abstraction or provider model, it's very often the case that the actual party happens on the concrete things. Oh, by the way, in case you didn't notice, GitHub added a new feature that is called activity feed, and by default it hides all events. So you only see the conversations. So if you're confused that you don't see events anymore, that's, changing labels and stuff, that's probably why. You can toggle this, so this is right under the top issue description. There's a little drop-downy thing where you can change to show all. All right, so next one then, or previous one, I guess.
So this one, essentially we have this problem. GRPC shows it, but it can happen elsewhere where you've made a request to a remote server, but the response isn't expected to come back with anything for maybe minutes. And firewalls just decide, oh hey, this connection, I haven't seen any packets for it in the last 5 minutes, I'm going to drop it.
Right.
And from the gRPC client side, that just looks like the server hasn't sent anything. There's no sort of connection reset or anything like that happens. So this keep alive setting, it essentially just sends a ping packet occasionally if we haven't received something, to make sure the connection stays alive, and also to check that it is alive. And it looks like the issue wasn't updated. We didn't like the name Keep Alive because HTTP already has this well-known concept of a Keep Alive connection, and we didn't want to cause confusion with that. So we changed to align with the ASP.NET names of Keep Alive Ping on the bottom comment there. It's still kind of, it's not a great name, but it works.
It's a name.
So what's the relationship of these two? It feels like the timeout should really be a multiple of the number of pings. Right?
So what will happen is if we have not read any bytes since the interval, we will send a ping frame. And if the server does not reply with the pong frame within the timeout, then we assume the connection is dead and close it.
Does the server have to reply specifically with a pong, or can it just start sending you any data at all?
It is not required to immediately reply. So this would be more of a like, hey, if the server's misbehaving and they don't send something within 30 seconds, then there's something wrong.
Okay, so my initial understanding of like ping interval 15 seconds, timeout 2 minutes is actually wrong. It would be ping interval 15 seconds, timeout 5 seconds, or something. Yeah. Okay.
That is so basically. So timeout is basically
The
how long
timeout
you wait
for the ping.
It's how long the server has to reply before we close the connection.
And then what is the interval again?
The interval is if no bytes have been read from the connection. Once that interval elapses, we will send a ping.
And this has
Oh, I
no
see.
semantic meaning. Protocols older than HTTP2?
No.
No, it has no meaning, or yes, it has no meaning.
Sorry. No, it has no meaning. It's an HTTP2 specific feature. There's also
Your understanding is correct.
there is an HTTP, or sorry, there is a TCP keep alive setting actually, which is kind of similar, but that only handles your specific hop. And if you're going through something like a proxy, then it's possible for the connection to get zombified on the proxy side and not your side. So this is kind of, we need this solution rather than just relying on the TCP option.
We could still use it for HTTP 1.0, right, to be at least improved if we choose to. And I know it's not the end-to-end, but I always felt there are many situations where it would help if we actually said it. So this would be our hook to improve HTTP 1.1 if we choose to as well.
Well, because with unless there's something built in the protocol, the only thing that you could do is just send an empty TCP frame so it flows through the connection, but they wouldn't have any way to respond, so you'd be ignoring the timeout, I think. I mean, you get the like TCP ACK, but I don't know that you can measure that.
We could potentially use this setting to configure just the TCP keep alive. Like, it wouldn't be perfect, but it would be better than nothing.
Fair enough.
There's really no other option for HTTP 1.
Yeah, I think the improvement. So again, we have option to do something possibly. So make it somewhat meaningful more.
Do you expect to ever want another setting, like the maximum number of pings?
No, we already have a setting right now for connection idle timeout, so that's handled already.
Okay, because just wondering if effectively if you want a period between ping and interval and between ping and timeout of that you make a keep alive ping policy property, and but if it's the two, that feels over engineered.
Yep.
Seems reasonable to me. What's your cat think, Levi?
He just wants to be social. I think honestly the names are fine as proposed here. A lot of it's going to be reading the documentation anyway, right? Because it's not really an interval because you're not doing it periodically. You're doing it as in response to a delay.
Well, we would wait for the delay and then it would become periodic until we started receiving other data.
I guess the reason that I called it out as a distinction is because if you look at our timer API that's built into .NET, like interval is every 500 milliseconds go, regardless of anything that happens in between.
Yeah, interval is a bit of a weird choice, but I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't know how. I didn't find the settings in ASP.NET quickly enough, but like, if it's a popular API, it might be beneficial to use the same terminology.
It's not a popular API. It was just implemented.
I see. So then, because to me, it's kind of like, I can't think of a description that would accurately describe what this thing does without reading docs anyway. And then it's at least nice if it's the same term, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, looking at ping interval, with keep alive, it makes sense to me that it's, I don't know if it's rising edge to rising edge or falling edge to rising edge of what the interval is measuring, but it hardly matters. The confusing one to me is timeout. That's the one that I would end up in documentation of like, oh, it's the timeout on the ping, not how long to keep pinging. And so, but I guess how long to keep pinging you expressed is already on the maximum receive wait time or whatever it's called. So
yeah, so I guess if we did want to suggest a name change because we're bike shutting, I would probably change the word interval to delay and keep timeout as is.
It works for me.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Delay seems closer to how I would think about that.
Yeah, because it's a delay before we send a ping, and then the timeout is the timeout period after we send the ping to receive a response.
I mean, if you really want to be fancy, you can say keep alive delay to ping, and then keep alive ping timeout, right? I think that would probably be most accurate.
Yeah,
but
again, like that's
group
pure
together
bike shutting. Like
Yeah, I mean, keep alive on the other hand is like close enough as a prefix, right? But yeah,
probably true.
Either way it works. All right, so then seems nobody was excited about my proposal. I would just go with keep alive ping delay and keep alive ping timeout.
What was your proposal?
Keep alive delay to ping.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, not excited about that one.
you should take ownership for the proposal that people are pseudo excited about, Emo.
Ouch. I love you guys too.
Ich liebe du, Emo. Ich liebe du. All right, let me guess. It's Liba, not Liba, and
No, it's Liebe indeed. Yeah.
okay.
I know German is hard. Where the fuck is it? Here's the window. All right. So then I guess we are now done with
Blocking. Making sure nobody refreshed it or nobody added one. Okay.
So, Eva, do you want to talk about one info one, or should we just leave that aside?
We can talk about it if we want to. The only thing we didn't cover at the last session was like the last year of the plan, the last 2 years.
Yeah, but then that also is so far away that maybe we should just ignore this part and because I mean realistically what actually matters for us is the next 2 releases.
Yes,
I
and
think
we
for
had
5
and
and
we had
6,
already approved them. Yeah.
Yeah, so then let's just mark this approved and move on.
Okay, sounds good.
Because
the
I mean,
largest
literally
issue we've ever
arguing about
heard.
what happens in 3 years is bike sharing, right? Like,
That's a
it's
problem
like-
for 3 years down the road. Us.
Yeah. All right, so then I guess the sockets flaggy thingy, whatever it is.
Yeah. So we have a problem now with Blazor where the sockets HTTP handler API exists there, but it just doesn't work. So James is asking if we can add a is supported bool. I called out that I know that we're dealing with these Windows specific APIs and flagging them in some way. I imagine we have a similar like feature check thing that needs to happen across a lot of those APIs. So I wonder if this is part of a sort of broader problem. Maybe we need another API to check if things are supported on your current OS. Otherwise, this is supported API would be fine.
So what would that control? Basically, it would mean that if you knew it up, it blows up already?
You can new it up, but if you access anything on it, it gives you a platform not supported exception.
Cool. I'm
Then
glad
why does
we
the
made
constructor
work.
Maybe the constructor has it too. I don't think I saw it there, but it might be there.
Yeah, I mean, like, I mean, regardless of whether the constructor throws or not, but it sounds like effectively the whole type is unsupported then, and I think in that case, is supported makes sense to me. I mean, generally speaking, this is the pattern that we have pushed for, which is a static bool is supported on the type. If it's for type granularity, if it's for features on the type, then I would probably still go with public static bool is feature name supported. And then for anything that is configuration based, yeah, it would be an instance method, right? If it depends on actual state, like, oh, can you actually write to the stream? Well, it depends that you open the file with, write mode or not. So that seems reasonable. I think the only bigger thing that we may want to consider is, like we just talked about, the WinHTTP handler. We should probably do the same thing there and then just say, well, or we just say, screw it, that's what we have the analyzer for, right? If it's literally an OS platform thing, we would just say, yep, we mark it as platform specific. The analyzer will tell you, and then, you basically surround the thing with an OS check.
Right. Well, this is going to be similar because it's, I was going to say, you should write this down on your list of things that you need to paint. It doesn't work on WASM.
Right. So the WASM thing is kind of the same, right? It's just we would mark the APIs. This won't work in Blazor, and so it will be the same thing, right? But instead of saying if is Windows, new WinHTTP handler works, you would say if not Blazor, then new sockets handler would work, right?
But to throw complications into your spec, once we already have an is supported check, presumably we want that to bypass the OS checks because that was on the specific API set. So now the analyzer gets hard.
Well, sort of. Like, I mean, that's something we need to consider what that means. But like, I would generally say, so there is a spec that I have for capability APIs, where the idea is you can actually mark things as this requires a capability check, and that would work very similar to the OS check, where basically we would basically check that you did check the capability API. But like this would be different.
What's our strategy for all of the other APIs that don't work if you're not on Windows? Like, are we adding an is supported flag to them, or are we expecting an analyzer to take care of it?
No, that's kind of the thing. So when I originally wrote the spec, there's basically 2 kinds of APIs, right? There's okay, this is clearly a Windows-only feature, like registry or WinUI or WPF or WinForms, right? Where it really doesn't make sense to put capability APIs for those because, first of all, there's not a good way to put them. And then secondly, for iOS, for example, the problem for iOS isn't necessarily does this API work on iOS. It's, well, which version of iOS is the API in, right? And so basically there's this additional variable, which is what is the version number. And so basically when you think of it this way, then, well, we would say everything that's platform specific or OS specific would generally mark as an OS specific API. And then the capability API is the OS check. That's it. And the analyzer makes sure that you're consistent there. Then there is this thing like reflection emit, where, well, it's not really an OS specific API, clearly. But there are cases where it works and there are cases where it doesn't work, right? And then there are cases where it works, but not quite the way you want it to, right? Which is, yeah, the code is interpreted, not actually executed. And so for those cases, we really want capability APIs because it's the only thing that makes sense. And then the question is, okay, how do people discover the fact that there's a capability API they're supposed to check? And that's what Analyzer would help. But the feature would work very differently. So I would generally say if the primary selector is the OS, I would not make a capability API. I would say that's we modeled this in a OS-specific API, and then the Analyzer will handle that. Everything that is conditioned on, because it's a cross-cutting feature like reflection emit that works in certain environments but not others, then we would model this for capability API. Does that make sense? Or
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
so in the case, so basically in this case, the question now is this this sounds more like the reflection emit case, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is more like it. If you can open a socket, then it is supported. So currently, WebAssembly is the only one it's not supported in, and actually, we're probably going to have the same problem using Xamarin on iOS.
So is the PNSE coming out of socket's HTTP handler, or is it coming out of when it tries to open the socket?
Socket's HTTP handler.
Because if it was really just expressing status here of whether or not it thought sockets were supported as a lower level thing, then that would make sense to me. But if it's that we're building a variant of the library and our variants are always keyed off of OS, then that feels like we've called it an OS problem.
Right. It seems, generally speaking, the other question is, so for Blazor, right, doing capability APIs for Blazor also doesn't make sense because some of the things are so fundamental that we really don't want to push it on people to say, please check this capability API. Like, do you have a file system? Do you actually have threading support? And so I think that's the other reason why for most of the Blazor APIs, just saying this will blow up in Blazor makes more sense. So because then also we will not force it on everybody, but we basically say it depends on the project configuration whether an analyzer checks for unsupported APIs in Blazor, and the default would be no. Versus this one sounds more like it's not supported in all the handlers we care about. But then the question is, like, what are the conditions where this actually doesn't work?
I want to bring up another problem too, something that was very slightly hinted at by James's original issue, which is that there's going to be a growing number of applications that are going to run in environments that don't support Socket's HTTP handler, but we are also publicly telling people you should be using Socket's HTTP handler for everything. There seems to be a disconnect here.
Well,
and
I think we tell them you should use HTTP client handler with having no opinion, and then we put all of the places that you need to have an opinion on things on a specific type, which violates that previous statement.
Okay, because it means that we should either change what we're telling people or just shim this so that it kind of half works in these environments.
Yeah, I think what we're telling people is use the default, which is to not specify any handler if you can. Otherwise, use HTTP client handler, which does abstract it for you. And it does not provide the same level of same granularity of settings because not everything can be abstracted.
Sure.
And use the actual implementation sockets HTTP handler if you have one of those specific settings you need.
Yeah, there is a thing that the is supported would help with that the not supported on certain configurations attribute wouldn't, which is library code that wants to do the best it can based on its runtime environment. Like certainly they could write if I'm not Blazor do whatever, but I don't know if the is supported flag makes it easier for them to detect that there may be configurations where the code that they're about to write is not correct or what. So
yeah, and that's the whole intention of this issue. James is working on the GRPC client library, and he wants a simple way to see if it will work for him or not.
I mean, first times exceptions suck, right? So we should not have that pattern that he has there. My question there is more, I guess, along the side of what Jeremy was asking, which is, should we just have a factory method that gives you the best handler for your platform, and then light up code is basically just saying, well, if the handler happens to be the socket HTTP handler, then customize it further. If it's not, then don't bother.
The default constructor for HTTP client already gives you the best for your platform.
But
yeah, but how do I get that now? Do I have to change it in HTTP client and then fetch out the handler? That seems a bit backwards.
Oh, well.
So build me the best thing,
you're
then,
saying...
then as cast it to sockets HTTP handler, and if it is a sockets HTTP handler, then customize it.
Gotcha. Yeah, that could make some sense too.
Because I mean, I like the idea that basically the default is you just new up the root type and you get the best thing, and then I think it makes sense for people that want more advanced stuff. Well, they new up the handler, but they cannot really say the type, right? We ideally want them to say, well, you get the best type that the platform has, and then there's additional things that all of these handlers will have, and maybe that gets you some way there, and then there's some further customization that depends on what type you got back. That might solve most of your customization problems, because I keep hearing this thing that we say that the handler is for advanced scenarios, but there's more and more libraries who say, well, I need to instantiate the handler because I'm doing advanced stuff, but I don't know where I run. Like that was the same problem that they had on iOS, right? Where somebody, where you had to do the iOS handler or whatever the thing was, and we said, well, that's bad because we tell people generally that they don't do that.
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
creating the factory and already having a configuration where it returns something other than sockets HTTP handler will mean that we already have the punishment in place for the people that do the hard casts, so we won't end up with the problems we had with crypto config. But it does seem like that may be a better answer. Of once the factory has, you really do need to use as instead of a hard cast, or if you were going to do a hard cast, just say new yourself, then it has value.
I mean, they're not necessarily at odds, right? We could still have an is supported on sockets HTTP handler as well, right? But I think as a general pattern, it might actually be better to say HTTP handler dot, I don't know, create best implementation.
is there a chance that it's actually not a best implementation? They are just different, and each of them might have some benefits. And
well, the default handler is going to do something on the platform, so presumably it would just be give me the platform default handler, but as a rich type instead of as the hidden type.
Yeah, what happens if you? It's basically, I think before people said that's basically what HTTP, what is it, client handler is, or message handler. I forgot which one it is.
Yeah, that's what that is. But that handler wraps sockets HTTP handler and our diagnostic handler right now, and it doesn't provide you any way to get sort of the whatever it's wrapping.
I see. So you basically effectively so you effectively get the sockets HTTP handler, but it's wrapped.
Yeah.
So if you would have had a factory, you would have been able to actually expose it as sockets HTTP handler instance wise. The only reason we can't do it is because of the constructor.
Yes, we have I don't care, but not I don't know.
Right.
Yep.
Well, then maybe we should file a secondary issue for that, and then the team should decide what to do.
Would it be possible for the the current I don't care one? Can we easily expose the rich type, or is it not actually a rich type underneath? It's a much more complicated beast.
Because it's a little bit of a complicated beast because we wrap the sockets HTTP handler in a few different layers for some added features that aren't, and those layers are not public APIs.
Okay, so yeah, it sounds a little bit like a factory could be good. That is supported doesn't hurt, but it still seems like there should be a nice pattern. Imagine we end up with an iOS specific tuning model, a WASM specific tuning model, and whatever. people who want to do light up enhancement, doing an as feels better to me than doing this big waterfall of if this is supported, write this new, else write, or else if some other thing supported, write that new. Like, it gives them easier code to reason about, and if they only care about tweaking sockets HTTP handler, then they can.
Yeah. Why don't we postpone this issue for now? I'll bring up with the networking team if we want to expose the handler directly from the HTTP client handler. I think that might be a better solution.
Plus all the platform handlers, right, which might coming. That in the past we really only have like the legacy and the new one, but seems like we might have a more in the future. So stuff might get more trickier.
Yeah, I mean, and some of the handlers aren't exposed. Like we had a curl handler in .NET Core 2 that doesn't exist anymore. So
I was more thinking about the WASM implementation and the iOS, where there might be significant differences, not necessarily benefits or enhancements. It's just differences and stuff might not be possible, and we don't really have a type for them either, right? Now, right, Curry?
yeah. Well, we have a browser HTTP handler, but it's a private API right now.
Right,
So
right.
for this ascast thing to work, we'll have to expose that as an actual handler people can instantiate.
Right, which would only be valuable if it had knobs that they could set.
Yeah, they do, but
Exactly.
again, as Corey said, right now they are private and limited by what the platform can do. So,
But
it's gonna be messy.
yeah, I don't think that the is supported would really hurt. So if that's a, we want
Is
something for
supported
5.
is more
then-
likely for .NET 5, yeah. So maybe it's okay to just add that now and worry about the larger API later.
I'd be okay with that.
Yeah, let's do this. I have a write-up of what we just talked about with the factory method. Let's approve the is supported one as well, and then just leave this comment in as a consider doing this.
Sounds good.
Like, I hate when we basically make the perfect the enemy of the good or something like this.
Well, I think if we were talking about this for 6, we would say there's a lot of things to think about here. Let's
Yeah.
not add anything until we're sure what we want. But I do think that this is, even if this ends up being a one-off pattern in this space, it's not terribly bad. So getting something in for this release is better than depending on the catch model.
I mean, did we
Yeah, I
see
agree.
anybody but the GRPC who wants to know this, Corey?
I believe I've seen it in one other REST library.
I'm
But
just
I can't
wondering if
remember
we
which
should
one.
really rush it in. But
I mean, it's really just a question of anybody who's writing a library that might get pulled into Blazor of what's their good fix. And it seems like right now it's either embed into your program an understanding of what things look like, of if I'm WASM, then do something different, or do the catch, or we add the is supported flag. So
Yeah, let's do the is supported. I liked what Emo said. Approve this, and I'll talk with the networking team. If we do want to do the big thing, we probably won't, but if we do want to, then we'll come back with a larger API.
Yeah, so like, can you guys read the comment and tell me whether that makes sense?
Well, it's at the bottom.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I haven't figured out I can insert comments at the top yet.
Yep, that looks good to me. Well, hold on. You added is supported to HTTP message handler, not sockets HTTP handler.
Yeah, I saw that too. Details.
And while you're editing it, you can fix your indentation.
Yeah, I just did that too. Turns out text boxes are stupid for editing code. I really wish that they would have a proportional font on a fixed width font on GitHub.
Yep.
Anyway.
I mean, you already
All
use
right.
style overrides. You can probably do that.
Alrighty, so next one. Oh yeah, we said this one we should skip, right? That's a separate issue, right?
Okay.
I don't know if we should skip it, actually.
Because
You want to talk about it?
well, when you
discussed this last time.
yeah, you asked the question, but you didn't mark it back as like needs work or anything last time.
Yeah, so the larger discussion is like what kind of mockability support we should have throughout the framework, like iFile system, iClock, stuff like that.
Right.
But there's if types like this are already used widely amongst applications, like why wouldn't we add them to an assembly that already serves as a repository for much of this stuff?
Well, that's why I didn't mark it as needs work. Like, to me, it's kind of like I buy the premise. The only thing that I'm not entirely buying is the fact that ASP.NET already exposed iSystem clock in various assemblies. So if we now add an iSystem clock to the BCL, what happens to those?
Yeah,
Like, unless they're willing to make a breaking change and actually use the BCL one, I don't think it adds much value.
they have two different public ones and then two different internal ones. So,
To me, the feature request is reasonable, and I think, like, as evident by ASP.NET, it's clearly usable and useful. So I think that's, to me, good enough. File system is more complicated because, it's a bit more policy than just giving you a daytime.
to me,
like, that one seems reasonable.
this only makes sense for things like dependency injection, and therefore it feels tied to the dependency injection system. Like, it doesn't make sense to me that we would put it in system unless we built our well. So that was because one of the things in the middle is Fowler,
right?
possibly just as a straw man. In fact, it seems probably just as a straw man, suggested going to system instead of the Microsoft extensions primitives.
Yeah, it would go in extensions. It would clearly not go in system.
Yeah. And so the because one of the meta questions is for the BCL, or let's call it for the shared runtime, though all this might actually be in the shared runtime now. But what level of mockability do we want? And I think the current state is we're not mockable, and being mockable is rewriting everything. And I think that we aren't going to do that.
Right.
But
Correct.
saying that as the owners of a mock or of a DI system, that this seems like a primitive that should go along with that DI system, that makes sense to me. So, and iSystem clock, because that was one of the later comments, because I talked about it in the context of system in a comment where it was like, well, we would then end up wanting the singleton, and now we're just going to reference the singleton so we avoid object instantiation, and then now we're effectively back to the API we have, which is just give me the current time without creating objects. And but we added a lot more layers in the middle. And someone followed up of like, oh, well, you just inject one at the beginning. But it's like, well, right, that assumes you have a DI system. So
I think it would be useful. This aside, it might be useful to create a bunch of DI-friendly wrappers around our existing APIs. In fact, System Web Full Framework did that around the 4.0 timeframe, where they had their God object, HTTP context, but they also provided an abstract base class for mockability purposes, and then they provided a wrapper around that, which literally just forwarded everything to the God object static APIs. And those were all provided in box, basically. So if we, as a concrete example here, say that we had iFile iFile would be an interface that defined a bunch of the APIs like file.open, file.write all text, blah, 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 blah. And there would be a concrete implementation which literally just forwarded to all of that stuff, but we wouldn't actually change any of the types in the BCL. We would simply introduce these two new types in some package somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, in general, the statement on that involves an I something, and our design guidelines say don't add an I something.
Yeah.
And, I mean, yes,
I mean,
it's
in
much more
fairness,
nuanced than that.
like-
We have interfaces, but
Yeah, IOC, even in ASP.NET, doesn't require an I, right? Like I said it before, but to me, the I in extensions in an ASP.NET is largely a fashion, not a hard requirement, right? There are cases where you need an I because you actually expect implementations on existing types, but by and large, I mean, ASP.NET already has cases where they inject effectively concrete types or abstract types, right? HTTP client is a prime example for that. So I don't think that will be a deal breaker. Like, I mean, we could put it in system and make it literally, system clock, not iSystem clock, and that would be fine too. I think it would largely have the same problems as extensions in the sense that what are the existing features will actually take a system clock to begin with, but you don't have to have technically an IOC framework for that or a DI for that. You could just say you pass it to the constructor, right? It just gets tedious in times, but overloading might solve large number of them.
But the problem was always, where do you get the one to pass into somebody else's constructor? And we would end up writing system clock.instance, and people will pass that, and now we're back to being like the system is now only theoretically mockable.
No, I agree with that. I mean, that's why I'm saying, to me, the end to end for these things, if you actually want to have it for the entire framework, will be hard. But even if you put it in system and we say we only support certain areas for that, that might still be good enough as a starting point, because the areas we supported in might grow over time, right? And I don't know, like, we largely regret Microsoft Extension as a namespace, right? Like, it would have been better to actually have it something that makes more sense for the platform, but we didn't have time to actually BCLify all of it.
But for things like, file.read all text, or file.open, which is returning the file stream, like, yes, there are places where we have statics that in order to be more DI friendly, we could have non-statics, but that's just sort of like, we would have static file, and then a file opener class that the default, like, that exposes all these same things, and we provide no implementation of, right? And
no, we would have an implementation. That's the thing. We would provide both the base interface and the implementation.
Fair enough. But but we run into this weird, like, we're adding a thing that everything needs to be virtual on, and our guidelines are think really, 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 really hard before you put the word virtual on anything.
I don't think we can do that. Like, when you're talking about DI, like, you have to be prepared to add abstract members to a class, or to add members to an interface. Like, this is DI. We don't expect people to actually, like, to create subclassed instances of these within their libraries and then ship them, because if they did that, they should expect to be broken from version to version. Well, like, that's just how DI works.
Sure, but I mean, that kind of would defeat the point, right? You would have to say, like, you would at least have to ship more than one implementation now. You would have to ship a mockable one or something like this, right?
No, you don't have to do that. So the way that these would be, you basically have to throw out all of the design guidelines and consider how these things are going to be consumed from the perspective of testing. So from someone writing an application, they're only ever going to see the interface. They're never going to instantiate the concrete class. They're going to let their DI system do that. But let me finish that. From the fact of someone testing this, they're going to be using a framework like Mock.U to test this. They're not going to be broken by the fact that we added members to the interface or added abstract methods to the base class. Like, they expect us to do that from version to version. That's just how these things work.
Right, but the point
but then
is,
when you're in the unit test, how do you mock it then? Because somebody has to say, when we ship the system clock default, which actually gives you datetime.now, right? But then for the unit test, you want something that doesn't give you datetime now. So who is going to implement that guy? Is it us?
You would use Mock.U inside your unit test. You would use a framework like that to fabricate on the fly an instance that implements the interface, and then you would say, I am giving implementations of this one method or these two methods, and
then
everything else, depending on the framework that you're using, either returns default of T or throws not implemented exception. The framework just handles all of that for you.
So we basically auto-generate the other members with throwing.
Yes.
Right. I get. Yeah,
that's all code gen. It's all done dynamically.
Right, but so yes, you did say we have to throw out all the design guidelines, and that's part of the problem, because the current guideline says there would not be an interface. You would make the class, you would make it not sealed, and you would make it extensible. And
yeah, but that doesn't apply in this world, though.
Right, and so I think that the answer of the high level, like, because Dan asked the question, what are our guidelines about mockability, and this statement is going to come back and hurt me at some point, but essentially the guidelines say we're not mockable. .NET is not mockable.
I agree. I agree with that. Like, these should not be in system runtime. These should not be in any system namespace whatsoever.
Right.
If we introduce these, they should be in some different assembly, some different reference assembly that's meant solely for DI.
Right, and so
I can live with that.
Scope it to that context, seems fine. And then I don't know, like, if everything else in that layer is interfaces and it's matching, then maybe, because it's hard to say. It's hard to say that we're following the guidelines for a thing that is written against the guidelines, and we don't have good guidelines at this layer.
But let me just go back. We just spent 30 minutes on this. Like, I don't think we will approve it or reject it today. So, like, what would we do? I mean, I would say I would leave that out, and I would say let's have a broader discussion around how to do these things. But this particular issue, I would say, to me, is still predicated on the fact that no matter whether we put it in system or not, is whether we can reconcile the existing system clock types with this new type. If the answer is no, then I wouldn't do the feature no matter what.
Well, I
it
guess
seems to me stupid to have like 3 versions of iSystem clock.
I guess the reason that this discussion is useful is because if we make the determination that like that DI friendliness shouldn't be part of what the libraries team ships at all, then this immediately just gets closed as like.
Well, keep in mind we own
we're just not
extensions as well, right?
Yeah.
So like, it's just where we put it, right?
Yeah. So does that imply that creating DI friendly implementations is within the jurisdiction of something we would consider ever?
Like,
well, I would say yes. I mean, because we own extensions, and extensions has a lot of stuff that is DI friendly today, right? Logging is, I mean, clearly the DI container itself is DI, and we own all of that too, right? So like that. So to me, it's just a continuation of like where the framework stack do we think it belongs, but like our team would own it, so like we would have to deal with it, right? No matter what we decide here. I mean, to me, it's more like this particular feature. To me, if let's say even we say we only put it in extensions, right? It's still, I would only do it if we reconcile the other existing instances of iSystem clock. I think it defeats the purpose if you have 3-4 different types all called iSystem clock, and only one of them is the one that is mockable. Everybody else is just getting the
right. So I mean, there's a couple aspects. There's what layer should be mockable, and if we say no layers ever should be mockable, well, the fact that we own a DI system now means we can't say that. If we say that the stuff classically referred to as the BCL, we continue with. We have the design guidelines, they effectively exclude mockability, and that applies there. And now we say, in the context of the DI system that we currently own, I mean, imagine that the ownership changes again and there's a new team dedicated to owning the DI system that never talks to us. Like, what would the right thing for people using that system be? Saying that they have mockable now is reasonable, and so we can try shaping that in. And then we get the specific problem that for this particular concept, there are already 2 existing public definitions of this, that the whole proposal is, it's terrible that we have at least 2 public implementations of this. Can't we have the one? Or sorry, declarations of this because it's an interface. And so the question
is,
like, can we...
I mean, like, make a break and change, because that's within what these libraries have done in the past, right? That would not be...
We can
normally
probably
we would say
derived
non-starter,
interface them.
but...
Derived interfaces only break when somebody does explicit implementations, and the odds that somebody's doing an explicit implementation of the thing for mockability seems pretty low. So we care, we super care at the level of things in system.
Right.
This is probably within the tolerance of, I mean, ASP.NET 2 to 3 was a go completely rewrite how your app launches. So this is within their realm of acceptable breaking change.
I would say so. Like, I mean, but you can probably cheat too and write an adapter for the new one to the old one, given how simple the interfaces is. I just don't know how well that works with the DI container.
Right.
So,
well, the reason for doing the subclassing there would be, so if you were already referencing, I guess I don't know how well it would work with the DI system. If you're registering against the wrong iSystem clock, you would get a, I couldn't find a thing that implemented iSystem clock. And if you, but if you registered the root one, it would show up for both derived ones with the, if you did do the interface extension. And then we would need to somehow make it so that you didn't ever talk about those other names, because if you do the two usings, you'll get an ambiguous symbol reference.
Right. We would probably hide them, and like they're probably already in bad namespaces anyway, so that's totally fine.
Yeah, I mean, we would obsolete them basically, and then say you should use this other one instead.
And then you'd have to use a using alias to disambiguate if you happen to need both namespaces.
Yeah.
You shouldn't need both of them.
Well, the problem is I don't know where the existing one is. Right?
One of them's in ASP authentication.
Yeah, so if you're in the authentication code, right? So if you're using statement against authentication because you're deriving from the authentication handler, and the constructor takes an iSystem clock that happens to be in the authentication namespace, and you also have a using for, let's say, Microsoft extensions where we put it. Well, now the question is which iSystem clock did you mean, right?
So they actually take it as God.
Right, that's the problem.
Okay.
So like now, that's why I think probably
they leaked it into their
clear. Yes,
they leaked it into their actual object model.
There's one inside a namespace named internal,
yes.
which is the pubternal problem, and then there's the one Microsoft ASP.NET Core Authentication iSystem clock. And I assume that's a real namespace that people really use, and
right.
I guess there are buttons here for that.
Oh no, I think the idea is that you're not actually supposed to set this unless you're testing.
Right, but it's would you have a using for the namespace? Because if so, now iSystem clock is defined in Microsoft Extensions primitives in some namespace and Microsoft Extensions or Microsoft ASP.NET Core Authentication. iSystem clock as a bare type word resolves at both of your global usings, and you need to disambiguate it with a fully qualified namespace or a using alias.
Yes, but that's a problem for your test project, not for your application logic.
It's a problem for anything that needs to say iSystem clock. Like if you
which would be your test logic, not your app logic.
No, like in my case, it was the actual app code because I extended authentication handler, and I basically had to define the constructor, and the constructor just does forwarding. Right, I take 12 arguments and I pass them to the base type, and one of those arguments ends up being, basically ends up being iSystem clock.
Yeah, there's a very aggressive breaking change suggestion on the YouTube chat, which is just delete the other public iSystem clocks. But that would be a binary breaking change on roll forward. And I don't know how amenable we would be to that.
There is precedent in ASP.NET for that.
Yeah, I was about to say it seems within the realm of what we have done in the past. I think in this case, to me, the gymnastics of making it work are worse because we can't hide it, right? I mean, we can hide it from IntelliSense, but as Jeremy just explained, like there's still a long tail of like issues around having all these 3 types now. So I'd be actually in favor of saying either we delete the types or we don't do the feature. I would not have like 3 conflicting iSystem clocks. That seems to me defeating the purpose.
For some reason, I missed the auth one. I was looking at source.net and only saw the abstraction, and only saw the one on the memory cache, which was only for testing purposes. Okay, got it.
I mean, maybe the auth one is also so esoteric that maybe we convince ourselves we don't give a fuck. But like, I would generally say, if we do things like this feature within extensions, maybe a breaking change is okay. I mean, like, maybe we can convince ourselves that that's the right thing of doing.
Right. While it won't break apps, because there's no major roll forward is off by default.
Right.
Any NuGet component that is consuming or extending the existing iSystem clocks would get broken. They would have to do a TFM split and republish for the new runtime.
And again, it would be very weird for someone to try doing that with something that's meant for DI, though. Like it's not unheard of. It's just strange.
Well, that was my scenario is, right? I'm pretty sure if you go to ASP.NET Core contrib, which basically defines a bunch of authentication handlers, right, for Google and Facebook and Twitter, I guarantee you if you search for iSystem clock, they have it all over the place because the constructors take it. They don't actually care. They just have to forward it.
Is contrib even still being updated? Like, can we make changes to contrib?
I actually don't know who owns it, but like it's just an example of like library space that extends core functionality without actually being DI itself, right?
Okay.
I actually don't know where it is. Where's ASP.NET Contrib?
I thought it was under the ASP.NET org, but I don't see it anymore.
I think it might have been its own org.
Yep, right here. If you extend, authentication handler of T options, so any NuGet package that provides an authentication handler would be broken on this change.
And again, maybe that's okay because, as you said, you can trivially, because you have a TFM boundary, you can trivially like do an if-def in your code base. I mean, trivial, right? But like you can do a change in your code base, dual publish, and
well, amusingly, if we get rid of the old one, which is the candidate proposal or the straw man we're discussing, if we get rid of the old one, then you just need to change target platform to target platforms, put the semicolon, and put net5, and when it rebuilds the net5 package, there's only one iSystem clock, which is a different iSystem clock, and everything just rebinds. The trouble is the
source code would probably just bind fine. Yeah.
Yeah, the source code. It's a non-source breaking change, assuming you have all the correct usings. But it is a binary breaking change. And but if that's the realm of stuff that is acceptable in the domain we're in, which is not a domain I'm used to thinking about because BCL, the answer is no breaking changes ever. I know we've moved slightly beyond it. Never. But we would never do this in the BCL. And
deleting types is pretty much a non-starter, right? But like I think that's what I'm saying. To me, the feature is like the discussion really is like for iSystem clock is like, are we willing to do that breaking change? If the answer is no, then I would just close the feature. I think having 3 types with the same name makes no sense to me.
We can probably delete.
You could argue that
the other one.
We could delete the other one. What do you mean?
Well, so there's one option. I guess one way that we could do this, which is weird, is to say that this namespace is the one that matters, and it's weird that it's defined in this namespace, but we delete the other one and we move it to the primitives library.
I mean, clearly, system clock belongs to authentication.
Right.
I mean,
I'm just like that is an answer. It's not a great answer.
Right.
I'm not terribly sold on trying to keep this particular API stable anyway, because when you're talking DI, you don't normally have an abstract class with a protected constructor that takes injected components, because it means you can never make changes to this in the future without breaking your subclass types.
Right.
Fair enough.
So, this isn't normally a way that you write something that is used by DI.
Fair enough. So I guess really the answer is if you can get whoever would need to sign off on the ASP.NET side, so I'll just say Fowler. If you can get Fowler to buy in, then sounds like we're just good to go. And whoever you means in this case.
Who owns this stuff on our end, by the way?
If it's in Microsoft Extensions, it's probably Miriam. Unless she's just logging. I don't know who owns the DI stuff.
So it sounds like the conclusion is that like this is potentially an area of interest for us, so we shouldn't just dismiss it wholesale. But iSystem clock in particular has tendrils everywhere, so we can't make forward progress on this issue at the moment.
Right. The problem is the name people want already exists, and the reason that it's the name they want is because it already exists. So we're solving a circular complexity problem, and so that has a unique breaking change aspect. If someone gave the proposal of I want the file opener, whether we design it as an abstract class or an interface or whatever, and that they wanted that to go with the DI system, I think that we would be okay. Just this one has complexity.
Okay.
Because clearly the DI system and mockability go hand in hand. But the other issue of how mockable should the framework be, I think that our current position is DI-based things, yes. Things below a DI-based thing, no. So
I agree. Yeah, that seems reasonable.
System packages are not mockable, or system packages may do some things to help with mockability, but they are not themselves designed to be mockable. And anything that talks about the current time isn't going to accept a time provider.
Yeah, that seems like a very fine stance to take.
Okay, so let me mark this now as API needs work to actually force a decision being made so it doesn't linger around in this state. And then we just post a comment that says, are we okay with the breaking change again? Tagging the right people, hopefully. All right.
The problem with, I guess the execution context thing is 6, so we can wait until Steve comes back.
I would skip everything we don't want to do because everything is future now, basically. I think we only had 1501 and we already proved that.
Hey, Levi, you're here, and I'm sure we can spend the rest of the time talking about this one thing, so do you want to talk about this one? Or do you want to skip it?
You're muted, Levi.
Thank you.
Well, because otherwise the swearing would be public.
No, I think Emo does that enough for all of us. Instead of looking at this, can we look at what's in the designs instead?
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm fine with skipping that and actually doing, like, a bunch of the small ones.
Then we should do that instead.
Okay.
Because we did a good job of driving the issue list down. We are now down to 20 total, which is actually nice. Ideally, we get to, like, 5 or 10.
Actually, that one I'm just going to close it and redirect all conversation to the designs one.
Cool. 21.
So that one, I think I saw yesterday. It seems very reasonable to me. I'm not sure I like the naming, but like it seems as a feature very reasonable.
Yeah, so this is, we use this internally in our collection types as a performance optimization, and it would be nice if other people could do it too.
I mean, I'm pretty sure it has come up before. I mean, I think you can do some crazy gymnastics to do the null check, but it's not great.
Yeah, it would be really nice if we had like C# language support for dealing with GC refs rather than just straight up pointers. But until that comes online, we have to do hijinks in the unsafe class.
Yeah.
I mean, a thing that worries me for the .NET ecosystem would be the easier it is to create null refs, the more likely they are to appear, and everyone knows that refs can always be safely interacted with. And
yeah,
I mean,
like,
it's
why not
true.
just use a pointer at this point?
Well, because it's
Because
not
you
a
may-
pointer.
Yeah,
it's
you
better than
may-
a pointer.
You may want to avoid overhead of pinning or other scenarios, which we also do in our own code.
Well, also you can't do pointers when they point to managed objects easily, right? So
Right.
You can't do them easily, but you can.
It's really painful to do them, yeah.
Mainly because C# blocks it,
yeah, I mean,
or tries to.
they are on the class named unsafe. We're back to I would really love a way that we could make the compiler only allow this in unsafe blocks. Not because any particular reason other than there's the project level setting of should I allow unsafe code, and this is you get to write the word unsafe without checking that box, and it would be nice to make people think more.
Funny thing, these two APIs are actually fully verifiable in typesafe. It is absolutely valid to have a ref-t that points to null. The type safety system understands it and supports it and is safe.
Yes, but anything that has a ref parameter that has been written in C# doesn't understand that it could have been null and assumes that it's...
Yes, it does. Actually, it does. If you look at the actual code gen, all of it is guarded against the fact that someone might be passing a null in there. It's totally valid and legal to do it.
Well, I mean, you blow up with a null reference exception, right? So like it's exactly as unsafe as an unchecked argument, which we have all been guilty of at some point in our careers, right? And the world hasn't ended. I think to mean, yes, it's true that nobody will write an if ref-t is null today because you can't express it in C# without this API to begin with. But like, I don't think that's terrible. It just means you get a null reference exception as soon as somebody does something with that.
And we have a nice exception through a ref write through null.
Yeah, it's an argument null exception, or null ref.
Okay, so the assignment expression null refs.
Yep, absolutely. It's just like trying to write to a field on a null reference object.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it seems reasonable.
I mean, I resent my earlier statement. I actually like the naming now because we call it ref everywhere else in the type. So null ref makes sense actually in this case because it's just that the reference is null, right?
It's kind of funny because like these are, as far as I can tell, these are actually the only two safe methods on the unsafe class.
Yeah. Like I know that with a bunch of p invokes, I've ended up doing things of defining, you know, two overloads, one that takes a ref whatever, and another that takes int pitter, so I can pass null. And it has been
Yeah.
frustrating that I can't just write the word null and make the compiler write the right thing. So I've seen places that I would use this. I just worry about the I worry about the ecosystem.
No, I agree. That's why I think using the unsafe class for stuff like this is probably
The best
at
we'll
least a good starting point. Yeah, saying like, hey, if you're doing this, you're probably entering a world of sadness. I believe that was also a song in Willy Wonka, but yes.
It's worth calling out that we had the debate on whether it should be ref or in, because in is technically more appropriate, but Vlad and Jan pushed back against that on the basis that it's very easy to get in wrong with semantics that C# set up for it.
Yep.
Fair enough.
And then I proposed also exposing is null read-only ref. That way you wouldn't have to do is null ref unsafe as in T to get it to work. But both Levi and Jan pushed back on it doesn't look like there's necessarily clear value on that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and in
that makes
an
sense.
ideal world, like we would just have compiler support for GC refs. But actually, Tanner, do you think that's something that's ever likely to happen?
For which, sorry, could you repeat?
For doing arithmetic on GC refs as opposed to regular pointers?
I don't know if that's something that C# would be willing to add. You'd have to talk to probably Jared quite a bit and convince him of the value over using this.
Okay,
So
it
sounds
was
like
worth a shot.
Are you missing an ISA, Tanner?
Yeah, so we approved the SHA extensions for ARM. We never actually reviewed and approved them for x86, so this is doing the parity thing that we talked about when we reviewed the ARM intrinsics of let's just expose them like we did with AES, and people can shoot themselves in the foot if they want to.
There's only the two,
Yep, just SHA-1 and SHA-256.
and that's the SHA casing we used in ARM.
Yep.
Does ARM use the same message schedule 1 and message schedule 2 and next D and rounds?
Schedule update 0, schedule update 1, hash update parity, hash update majority, hash update choose, and fixed rotate for ARM. And then for SHA-256, it's hash update 1, hash update 2, schedule update 0, and schedule update 1. So these names just mirror the x86 names, whereas the ARM ones mirrored the ARM names.
Fair enough. I see that it's called SHA-1 rounds 4, and we don't have the 4. Is that 4 semantic?
Let me double check.
While Tanner's checking that, we do have a work item to create an analyzer to flag uses of the existing AES intrinsics. I would imagine that we would want to flag these as well from that same analyzer, saying, hey, you probably should be using the built-in class unless you really know what you're doing.
Yes, it is semantically relevant. Because the instruction performs 4 rounds of the SHA-1 operation. So we should likely have like maybe round 4 times or something.
Mm-hmm. Or
as
call
the
it
name.
FOUR rounds.
Yeah, that would work as well.
And then the 256 would be TWO rounds.
Yes. And then the next E is calculate state variable E after 4 rounds. But I'm not sure that's a good name.
Yeah, I mean, if Intel assembly suggests that it's called SHA-1 nextD, then SHA-1.nextD looks
Yep.
reasonable. So yeah, my only all right, so message schedules 1 and 2, the C++ intrinsic, or I guess the C intrinsic, says A and B, and we said A and B, and then when we get to rounds 4, it says A and B, and we said state 1, state 2. Our names are probably better, but I note that they're different. And then ask, is there a better name for A and B in the previous ones?
So did you make any changes to the API yet, or is it just as Tanner has proposed so far?
Well, we want to include the rounds needs to indicate, in SHA-1 it needs to indicate it runs 4 rounds, and in SHA-256 it needs to indicate it runs 2. So my suggestion was prefix spell out the word 4 and prefix spell out the word 2. Otherwise we haven't changed it yet.
I see. So rounds TWO and rounds FOUR.
I mean, if we're going to put it as a suffix, then we can write it as rounds 4. If we want it as a prefix, then it would be FOUR rounds. Since we can't start with a number.
So for ARM, we named the variables W0 underscore 3, W4 underscore 7, W8 underscore 11. However, we don't have 3 variables here because the functionality is slightly different.
Right. So I get really it's it's in rounds they were called state 1 and state 2, even though the C intrinsic for it just called them A and B. And if we found better names for the one in rounds, can we find better names for the other functions? And that's just a feedback suggestion for them. I don't know that we need to actually discuss and decide the names. And
I'm not familiar enough with SHA in particular to suggest better names here.
I read through like 3 pages of how to move it, or how someone was going to actually move this into hardware for the first time, and didn't understand any of it and put it down. There were wiring diagrams. They had corners.
I'd be fine with just calling them all AB and the appropriate name from the C++ intrinsic if we don't have better suggestions here.
Yeah, let's do that, especially when we tell people not to use these types. It seems like it's such an expert API anyway that it's like the 2 people in the world that will use it probably know the other ones.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the thing missing here that would be included is the Git is supported property.
Yeah.
I just noticed they were missing.
Oh, they're actually new types. I see. Okay,
Yeah.
One I did not.
Yeah, and then because if nothing else, we said we wanted them on all the subclasses. I guess we don't need to split this for 32 and 64.
So based on the last discussion, they would now have x64 classes that report nothing and expose nothing. They are leaf nodes, however, so we don't have the same concern that some of the other ISAs had.
Okay. Oh, right. It's the... yeah. Okay. I got you. Yeah, so follow the pattern with all the types. And so what name do we want for the rounds? Are we just going to call it... we're going to expand the word rounds like we have and then put a 4 on the end?
Yeah, I'd either say we call it 4 rounds or rounds 4, and with 4 spelled out in both cases.
If we're going to spell it out, I'd put it as a prefix.
Yeah, I think it makes more sense as a prefix, quite frankly, because rounds 4 seems weird. It sounds more like the fourth version of that API.
Yeah.
Or round 4 times is the other suggestion.
Actually, that would be not bad. Round 4 times. Yeah, I can live with that.
Maybe, but it's not like it's rounding. It's doing 4 rounds of the state transition.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So then what? So what is it? 4 rounds then?
Yeah, 4 rounds.
But 4 rounds is
probably
not a verb.
best.
It's not a verb though, but yeah. So,
Yeah, but
and to be
this is
clear,
an
SHA
intrinsics
256 is 2 rounds and SHA-1 is 4 rounds, right?
Yeah.
So if I remember the discussion from the other day, we have 1,024 characters to use.
Okay.
Well,
So we could call it perform 4 rounds of the SHA-1 hash function.
I just like that the issue number is 256.
Oh
actually,
yeah,
that's pretty. That's good, Tanner.
I
I'm
didn't create
disappointed
this
that you
issue.
didn't. You should have split the SHA-1 into SHA-256 though, into 2 separate issues.
Yeah.
So, can you read the comment? Make sure that it makes sense.
No, because I can't see it.
Because it's my screen, not yours. I've
And,
identified a
and
problem
this-
with your MCing, and I'm presenting.
Yeah, you need to refresh your screen. I posted the comment already.
Tanner, this is a different CPU ID flag than AES, right? Just to confirm.
Yes.
Okay.
If it was the same, then they'd be under the same class.
And SHA-1 and SHA-256 are also different flags?
Yes.
Wow, okay.
Presumably, SHA-1 was introduced first.
I actually think they were introduced simultaneously, but x86 is very good about actually splitting into logical ISAs without requiring all of them to be implemented.
Yeah, maybe on
Which, of
future
course-
processors they'll drop the SHA-1 instructions, and maybe, probably not.
The proposal looks fine.
Yep.
Yep.
Oh, were we going to rename state 1 and state 2 to A and B to just be consistent?
If you really want to.
Yeah, I don't care. Either one
Yep.
works.
Yeah, I would say AB func and ABK just to be consistent with C++ and what's being passed to the other ones, since we don't have good better names for all of them.
So the last argument is K.
So it's AB func for SHA-1 and ABK for SHA-256.
Okay. Check again.
Looks good.
All right. Then one down. New argument list constructors, or what are we looking at next?
Yep.
Why a read-only collection rather than params?
Probably they had a
Params
list
might
and
be-
don't want to call to array.
That seems like something that would be covered maybe in the future when C# adds the expanded IEnumerable of param support.
Yeah, what happened to that? Why did they keep punting this? It seems like a simple feature.
Ping Jared.
I like that anything regarding C# is might be a simple feature.
Well, this one seemed very uncontroversial. Like when I talked with Jared, he's like, "Yeah, that's trivial." Like he said that many times. It's just we never end up doing it. I guess it just doesn't make the cut.
Yeah, because it's
Um,
trivial. You schedule it at
only-
the end and then find out it took more than the hour you left for it.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
So is the idea here that we would just be building up the command line and anything that has a space would be quoted?
I guess. That's what I read out of it, at least.
I mean, I will say though that would be useful because doing that yourself is tedious. So params wouldn't work necessarily because there's already an existing second argument of type string, and that would be the entire command line. So that would not be the same as a list with just one argument, because you
Yeah.
might need quotes.
Fair enough.
I don't see from the API review what the desired behavior is.
Behavior or actual proposed API?
Sorry, from the API proposal, I don't see what behavior you're going for.
I think
That's the thing. Like I don't know why you would ever use this API.
I think it's that you want the quoted. That you want to make sure that the thing that you put in the second position gets interpreted as the second argument, or
Yeah,
third,
but
depending on how you count.
sorry, I'm having audio trouble. If you look at the comment on November 28th, that's actually not what they're going for, though. If it looks like they're literally just concatenating everything with spaces between them.
Which is what the existing thing does. The existing overload takes a single string that it parses itself.
Because it builds because there's a collection somewhere.
Right.
And so this is saying make it easy to just inject things into that collection.
Well, and I honestly don't think it's easier. If you're having to, when you have something that's an IEnumerable or a collection rather than like params, I don't think there's really much saved over I have to construct it and then pass it in versus I do the construction and then I call item.collection.addRange.
Yeah.
Yeah, so apologies, but I think I may have missed one thing here. So, like, what is the conclusion? We don't know what the behavior is?
I mean, it seems like they're just trying to. They want this code, but without needing to say the word argument list. And if we're not actually helping them with functionality, we're just taking an existing. I mean, I guess we would because it's already broken apart, so we would just be copying it into the collection. But it doesn't. I don't see where it's more helpful. I mean, I guess if there's already the two-string constructor, then we could take string, comma, IEnumerable string and call it a day.
So maybe I'm missing this, but basically I'm already saying there is an argument list property. No, there isn't, right?
There is. It's a collection of string.
Oh, so we already do the quoting then.
They just want to be able to do it with new without, like, they want to get it in a flat, in a one expression call instead of a object initializer, which is technically only one expression. So they want to use a simple new instead of an object initializer.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we could
So what
we could do it. Let's see what.
I mean, to me, it's one of those examples where I can see that. I mean, like, I've written code like that multiple times. It seems like the accelerators that we have for start don't generally, or like, yeah, don't generally work for people anymore.
Right, so we have what to start, and then what to start with all the arguments, and then that parses the arguments to populate this collection, and then the request is overload this constructor with the enumerable of string of arguments already broken out in the segmentation you want them to be.
Right.
So, seems like low complexity, okay. It's probably the common thing you want if you're doing this, maybe. But yeah, so the original proposal is read-only collection. Somewhere along the line, Adam suggested collection so that it didn't have to new up a new one. But I think that we would do it as just IEnumerable of string. And if we get params IEnumerable later, then we could consider that, but we probably wouldn't do it because it would be ambiguous against the string.
Yeah, I think we would take IEnumerable and would just do an add range on the inner one. I mean, I'm still kind of questioning the wisdom of having the constructor argument at all.
Yeah.
To me, the real kicker here would be the static method that would actually save you characters, because that's by far the most common case. Like, I mean, if you knew up a startup info, you might as well like
That's true.
push this stuff down, right?
So that's what process.start. Yeah. So yes, if we did process.start of string file name, comma, IEnumerable of string arguments. Yeah, that seems more valuable than accelerating the process start info constructor.
Yeah, because once you do that, you're already in the 4 lines territory anyway, and then I don't care.
Right.
And I think at that point it literally becomes syntactic. Like, do you move it from there to there kind of thing?
Right. All right. Well, I don't know that we necessarily want to design the process.start, but so maybe we just reject it with the suggestion that it doesn't seem to be providing enough of a simplification, and that overloads to process.start would be more useful.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, just post what I have right now, and then we can decide what we want to do with it.
Okay.
Because there was the other thing, like, we should make our lives easier with proposing API changes, because the one thing I keep doing in these reviews is I look up the type on APIs of .NET, and I will find basically the existing overloads, because you kind of need to see that in order to determine whether the new overload makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so the edit add little value. The bigger gains are this would be process.start. Actually, do we expose the secure string ones on core? Yeah, we do.
Yeah, but see also deprecate secure string. Let's not add those overloads.
Yeah.
No, I was just because I listed them all. I'm like, do we even have them? But yes, we do have them.
Yeah, the ones that don't work are the ones that take credentials, and I think those still work on Windows. Jeremy, are you familiar with those?
I'm not, but I think that we brought the APIs back just for Net Standard 2.
Yeah.
Like, we probably intentionally left them out of core because we got rid of secure string, and then with type unification, where we said any member that was already in .NET Framework on a type that's already in .NET Core gets brought back, and the default behavior was make them work instead of just like it exists PNSE.
So here's what I have. Like, if you just refresh the thing at the very bottom. So to me, it seems like I would probably remove the startup info thing, and I would just approve this one method, because that one seems reasonable to me. And implementation will be trivial, right? You just new up a process startup info, set file name, initialize argument list, and call start process, start with the start info.
Yeah, I mean,
that will be a trivial accelerator, and I think that will probably remove 95% of the cases where people were to incline to actually do new process startup info today.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what order the of all the overloads call each other, but yes, that would be a functional implementation is. Yeah, I would. I mean, I think you convinced me, Emo, that the process start info constructor doesn't have enough value because you can just use the add range on the existing collection, which you can use with the object initializer and collection initializer patterns. And then, but the one on start seems good. So.
Actually, can you?
Yeah, that was right here.
I think if you have an enumerable, I'm not sure you can. You can probably do it for if you actually have the individual arguments. But...
Fair enough. If you have literals, you can do it with the collection initializer here. If you are wanting to add one collection, add the enumerable into the collection, then you would need to make it a two-statement thing because you'd need to call add range yourself.
Oh, that's right, because we can still assign to the property. Yes, that's true. Yeah.
Well, the property is read-only because it's a collection.
Okay, then toArray wouldn't help you any there, right? You would still have to say.
You'd have to do it in two statements. One is new process start info,
I see,
and then
that's what I meant.
process start
Yes.
info dot arguments dot add range arguments.
Yes.
Yeah, and I would call it arguments and not argument list because it's not a list.
You would call it arguments. Probably would make it also enumerable, right?
Yeah, and then I was gonna say, and then IEnumerable instead of IRead-only collection. So.
Yep, that makes sense. So like this then.
Looks good to me. It is a slightly complex overload between the single string and the enumerable of string, but if you only passed one thing that had no spaces, then it would be equivalent.
Right. That's the only downside, right? But given that we don't have params here, you would have to say these new brackets around it anyway to call it.
Yep.
So it seems fine.
All right, so we're
Right.
approving it as a rewrite, or needs work as a. This is what we suggest as the replacement.
No, I would just. I mean, we usually when we just make tweaks, I would just approve it with the tweaks, right? And I would approve process.start, but I would not approve the other one.
Okay.
And that's what this basically indicates. I mean, if they really push back and they say they absolutely want the constructor, then they can flip it back, and then we can talk about it.
So the reason why to do the constructor as well is because sometimes you may want to create a process and then do things like output redirection before you start it.
So
sure,
that's fine,
but then you've already created the process start info object, and yes,
Right.
while you can't do that as a single expression new with doing the add range if you receive the thing as a variable instead of a list of literals or a list of single arguments, it's still doable. We would be making it easier to do massively long statements, and that's not a thing we generally optimize for.
Right.
You would use the object initializer to set it up with output redirection, then you would call add range on the arguments collection, and then you would call process.start on that. It's 3 statements instead of 1, but the complexity is exactly the same.
Yeah, the constructor doesn't convince me, to be honest. There's an argument list property on startup info. What more do you need? I mean, I would argue that startup info was designed to be not a constructor to begin with, right? It was designed to be assign, and then pass the result to start. So the only reason why we have constructors is beyond me, because normally when you have the constructors, you would literally just call start with these arguments. Why would you even bother, instantiating the process startup info to begin with? I don't quite understand the pattern that we have there.
Right. I mean, you certainly should never call process.start with new process start info string close paren because
Right.
Because that was the same as calling the string one.
Right, and as soon as you have other things, then I would probably just write them out, right? I would just say new startup info and then file name equals blah,
Yeah.
Arguments equals blah, and then do the rest.
Yep.
All right, then let's see where this lands, and then let's go to the next one.
So
Is it the CPU ID thing?
did you tag it as anything?
Yeah, I did. Like you can't see it
approved.
because
Okay.
GitHub.
Well, sometimes it refreshes when you push. Mine refreshes when you push the button, but that hook didn't fire, so I don't know.
Well, I don't even see the approval anymore because I have this beta feature that doesn't show me any events,
Fair enough.
which I'm sure people will push back on.
So this one is basically let's expose CPU ID. We'd return a value tuple, and we would explicitly use the names EAX, EBX, ECX, and EDX matching the register names because there's a variety of functions basically that it can return, and there is no better meaningful name for it.
Is it always the E registers, or is it ever the R registers?
It's always the 32-bit register.
Okay.
The names are cringeworthy, but it is
It's
what
intrinsics.
it is. No, I mean, like, to me, EAX is always all caps or all lowercase, but like this mixed casing.
Yeah, that I agree with that, but whatever. The two people in the world who will use this API can get over it.
Yeah,
Yes.
they will.
I was thinking this may be one of the cases that we want to say that, like, treat it like a brand name and make it all lowercase, or treat it like a we look the other way acronym and capitalize it.
So if I remember correctly, Tanner, one of the reasons that we were looking at this is because we were trying to figure out if we were able to call some of the BMI2 functions on our current processor.
So
Is that right?
we yes, that's one thing you could use it for. We likely wouldn't use that ourselves in the runtime, just because there wasn't big enough of a perf gain, and because it increases our test complexity, the actual test matrix, to make sure we're covering everything. But other developers could do things like create a static read-only field that performs the is authentic AMD check, cache it, and then use that, which the JIT will then convert to a constant to perform their own optimizations like that. Likewise, you could do cache size lookups, basically anything CPU ID exposes. And caching in a static read-only field will allow the JIT to properly optimize it.
You had mentioned having accelerators for is Intel, is AMD, and so on. Do you think we would have accelerators for anything else, or is that really what all of the other is supported methods are for?
Yeah, most of the other ones are covered by the existing is supported methods. I listed some possibilities in the proposal here. For example, is authentic AMD, is genuine Intel, the caching the max function ID, getting the TLB sizes or the cache line sizes. Jan is currently pushing back against exposing those and just indicating he thinks devs can cache them in a static read-only field where they need. Depending on what request we get, that may change in the future, and we may expose additional properties for that stuff.
Sure. So is there any place that we might actually be able to use this within our own libraries in order to kind of test drive the concept?
There's likely a few places we could use it, and there's going to be plenty of tests validating that it's correct. But
because really this would just be used in tests to verify that the is supporteds look the way that we expected them to, right?
Right.
Because all the things that you would get out of this, we already exposed via is supported on the ISA components themselves.
Well, all of the ISA is supported checks, but there's plenty of information that isn't exposed, like other CPU features, or things like enhanced rep move SB, or getting your cache line sizes in case you wanted to do some specialized logic for laying out data optimally.
All right, so
that's quite a say.
yeah, so you had the alternative proposal of making a CPU ID object of some sort.
So well, not an object. The proposal. So, technically speaking, CPU ID is not considered a baseline instruction.
Right.
It is so the way you query for CPU ID support is you have to write to the ID bit of the flags register, which is, if I remember correctly, it's immutable on older processors and it's mutable on ones that support it. Maybe I've got the reverse though. And once you've done that, then you can use CPU ID for all the remaining purposes. But Jan's pushback was he doesn't think that it warrants an individual class just for CPU ID, even if we decide to expand it in the future with additional cache properties and such. And with it being a 20-year-old, 26-year-old function that's been on everything since basically the second iteration of 32-bit x86 processors, it's not worth separating it out. We should just treat it as baseline, basically.
Does this mean that all of the other x86 intrinsic types would now subclass x86 base?
Yes. We actually already have x86 base, but it's internal, and we expose the explicit, some of the explicit LZ count alternatives, for example.
And we would, I'm just going through the instruction list, and we would potentially put stuff like bswap, bittest, other stuff on here too.
Yeah, we could potentially put other APIs that are also considered baseline on the x86 base.
Are there any APIs that we would want to add immediately, or is CPU ID kind of the only one right now?
There's others that are, I think we've got proposals for some others, but they'd be in separate proposals and reviews. For example, multiply and divide. While we have the bigmul and divrem on system.math, there is explicit special functionality exposed by the CPU specific instructions that you can't necessarily expose. For example, taking a 128-bit integer split into two registers and dividing it by a 64-bit dividend.
Okay, yeah, I didn't mean to imply that we need to enumerate all of them right now. I was just thinking that if you did have some that you wanted to add in the future, then putting it on x86 base, sets the nice foundation for all of that.
Right. So if we wanted to add the utility type for CPU ID semantics, where would we put that if we take this proposal as is?
What do you mean utility type for semantics?
So that we did the which function / subfunction whatever, and then which bit you need to do for authentic AMD.
Oh, I would just suggest exposing them on the same ISA that exposes CPU ID itself.
Okay, so you would just make them be
on x86
static properties
base.
on x86 base.
Yep.
Okay, because my question here is really just, by taking this, are we blocking a thing that you think we might want to do in the future? But if you have a plan for how that would work, then
yeah, I think we would just expose them on the same class that exposes CPU ID.
Okay. And then I don't actually care, but I'm gonna ask because it would be cute. Is the JIT going to understand that the best assignment of the register return from this is in fact to not assign them if somebody deconstructs it?
So the way we're going to implement this is we are not going to do any JIT work. Instead, we're just going to forward to the C++ compiler implementation of their intrinsic. Because this is a complex serializing, it is the fully serializing instruction, the only fully serializing instruction. And we're not going to worry about the semantics or mess with the register allocator. We're just going to treat it as a Q call to the C++ intrinsic and let them deal with it.
Fair enough.
It sounds like the typical use case would be you do this inside of like the static constructor and then just cache the result, right?
Or your module initializer, now that those are supported.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that you've done it literally once, at least once for the type, and maybe once for the whole library. But
Yeah, CPU ID is basically something you want to call as few times as possible.
depends on whether you're afraid of Spectre. If so, call it a lot. The yeah, I'm torn on the casing of the names of standard Pascal or go full caps or go full flat. All of them seem justified. I'll do whatever, or I'll agree with whatever Emo says. Emo?
Yeah, I mean, it bugs me on the one hand side. On the other hand, though, like basically when people call this, they would probably immediately deconstruct it anyways into locals, in which case they will be all lowercase. So I don't think it matters. I would probably just stick to the naming convention so we just don't have oddity.
All right. So I agree with Emo.
Maybe the odd part about that, just to use up our last minute, EAX is actually 2 words. It's E and then AX, where E stands for extended and AX is accumulator register. So technically, it would be capital E, capital A, lowercase x.
Well, but the X itself is as distinguishing from AH and AL, because
Yes.
it's the X means the 16-bit and the E means replace the 16-bit with a 32-bit, and
So then we could just do all caps, but
yeah.
Is our function and subfunction function ID and subfunction ID the right names here? I'm looking through the manual and I don't see a reference to subfunction anywhere.
there's not necessarily good names for them, but function and subfunction is likely the closest terminology that accurately represents what you want.
Sure, I guess what I'm getting at is someone who's familiar with CPU ID going to understand what parameters to pass in there?
They should.
Okay, that's really all I care about.
What does it looks like the CPU ID EX C plus or C/C++ version of it calls it function underscore ID and subfunction underscore ID. So
Yeah.
Yeah, we're matching the names that they would understand already.
Yeah, and the manuals use the term functions and extended functions, which are not the same as subfunctions in a few places.
But really, this is, I guess, my assumption on this is things like CPU ID 0 probably doesn't have any map or behavior for the second thing, and like CPU ID 3 has here's a table of other values you can pass in this second value.
Yeah, basically like that.
Yeah.
There's a few of them where you pass in a function, and then you can also pass in the subfunction in the other register, and it changes what data is queried from it.
Right. So it would be you're reading the instruction manual, and it would say you can test for this by doing a CPU UID check of 3,4 or something, right?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. So seems fine. Ship it.
Agree, ship it.
All right, so it's approved as it was outlined. Scroll all the way to the bottom. Unless I missed some design change.
I don't believe so.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think, the first place we're lying in.
As is.
But the
it's the first place we're lying about the ISA.
I'm okay with us rounding 486 down to base.
The existing. So is anything else expected to derive from it?
Everything's going to derive from x86 base, if it doesn't derive from something else already.
So the type already exists, x86 base.
No.
Okay.
Well,
so that
yes, but it's internal.
I see.
But SSE, for example, will derive from x86 base, as will
And,
BMI1, BMI2.
and we called them ARM base in the
Yeah, and
So it's then to say like all x86 types will extend that.
Yeah, anything which doesn't extend from another right now will inherit from this type.
That makes sense. It's kind of how this was all designed to be anyway.
Yep. Makes sense to me. Just clarified the thing in the comment, and then that's it. Then thanks everyone. This was a fun meeting.
It was.
We got through several
We
things.
approved apparently 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 things even.
Do we have API review again tomorrow?
Yes.
Is it also backlog?
Yes.
Okay.
Unless you have something.
Well, no. Just it looks like several of the upcoming issues are mine. So.
Yeah. So like the nice thing is I think we're now down to 18 issues. The oldest one we now have is one that I just looked at, which is the process.start, which is 6 years ago, and then everything else is 14 months or younger. So like we are now actually. So ideally, when we're done tomorrow, everything is younger than 6 months. That would be great.
You're measuring that as from when the issue was first opened, right?
Yeah, which I think is fair, right?
Sure.
I mean,
I'm just saying, like anything that has been a API proposal or API suggestion for 5 years will then always has the chance of popping up as the new.
oh, sure,
oldest
yeah.
issue.
I mean, that's true. Like we very often get reset back by 6 years because somebody said something. But I think it would be good if we could dig ourselves at least out of the backlog debt that we have. And if we have like 10 open issues, that's probably fine. But
Yeah,
we used to have 50 open issues.
We might soon get to the point where we can go back to only doing this once a week.
Yeah, that would be nice, wouldn't it? I mean, I like you guys, but not that much.
By the way, I see that the two most recent issues that are in the backlog are adding half support to existing types. I'm wondering if we would actually want to fast track those because half was added in .NET 5, so we might actually want to try to slam these into .NET 5 as well.
I mean, it's reasonable. It's just does numerics. So Tanner, do you feel like promoting them for the fast discussion for next time?
I can talk to Jeff in my one-on-one today and see what he thinks. I don't think there's a particularly strong need because they're largely just helper APIs for things that you can do using other APIs already or manually.
Right.
Today.
Okay.
What I did for crypto, just to make sure we're all on the same page, is anything that I thought that somebody might want to open a PR for while 5's still open, I let them be 5 for review. And then as soon as we reviewed them, I moved them back to future for implementation.
Okay.
So it was,
Yeah, I mean, like,
if someone might want to implement it now from the community, then we should get the API shape approved so they have the option. And otherwise, just let it float to future.
let's just mark it for 5.0 because I mean the approval. Like the backlog is so short right now. There's nothing more important anyway. So
Right.
if we get it approved, good. If we don't implement them, also good, right? Like it's just when do we want to review it?
Yep.
So I just marked it, and now it will show up at the top.
That's so nifty.
Yep.
All right. See you guys tomorrow.
Yeah. I stay on the call with you, and then we just publish the notes.
Yep. Bye, Internet.
Bye,